Welcome back to the Dear Global Leader podcast. I'm super honored and excited because today I have Terri Morrison with me. I've read a lot of your books. You know that I'm a fan. This is the way we connected. So, Terri is a world leader in cross-cultural understanding and behaviors. You know, business behavior in international context. You are the author of the series. Kiss Ball and Shake Hands that I really really love. I think it's a Bible of a classical, so I hope that people could also get their own. But also something that is special about you is that you also advise in the legal institution. This was the beginning of your career, and now to board and to leaders, all everything to understand that there is not only strategy, but there is also cultural adaptation. So I'm super excited to have you here today. And we will have a discussion, of course, about cross-cultural, differences and what does it mean in business. So before that, I start the part one. I'm super honored to have you, and maybe you can explain to us what is the pivot that brought you where you are.
Thank you so much, Tiphaine. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm honored to be invited to your organization, your work. It's important that we promote intercultural communication in a positive manner, diplomacy, particularly now. So my start came, I guess, in high school. You know, you go abroad, you study,
Yeah.
and then in college. And then when I graduated with an undergrad, it was in Spanish. So I was a Spanish teacher for a little while. I loved it. It was so much fun. But then I moved and I went into high tech. And I found that, from my perspective, many things are culturally based, not business strategic issues. So
Mhm.
when I went to eventually high-tech firms and then Booz Allen, I was consulting, I noticed that when they had an issue in Mexico, for example, that they were losing a contract to nationalize the telecommunication systems there. And after examining it, I spoke with my then boss, and the analysis was that when you are a strategic firm, you go in and you look at unit production or development of revenue, and they decided that certain people were not generating enough revenue or were not productive. So unfortunately, it looked like they wanted to let go the patriarch of the entire organization. And in Mexico, like in many countries, there is a hierarchical structure, and family is exceedingly important, and
Mhm.
nepotism can be a good thing in those environments. So when they offered to release this individual, it offended everyone. It was atrocious in their mind that you would walk in and assume that you could get rid of the leader. And that was my entree into understanding, okay, this has a serious impact. What I can do is I can build a little database about these issues. And I asked my boss if he would be interested in purchasing it, and he said yes. So I quit and I started my company. So actually, before there were books, there was this little program back in Micro Basic on computers that were microcomputers. And I got AT&T and DuPont were my first clients. So I knew I was doing something decent.
Wow, I was not ready for that, and we already talked in the past. That's crazy. Actually, the this is a super good transition into the first part that I called a bit like this invisible, sorry, power codes of the global business, and we'll talk, silence, persuasion, first impression, and I wanted to start with like, what do you see that is like culturally defined towards first impression? Because usually we say it takes like X number of seconds to get a view of someone. So it needs to be influenced by cultural pattern. And I know you researched that topic.
Exactly. It's that whole concept of kiss, bow, or shake hands in that initial greeting. And if you are the supplicant, for example, you're trying to sell to someone, you should do the research about what is appropriate in the greeting. Do they shake hands? How close or far apart? This is a study called proxemics. Do you feel comfortable with that individual? So if I'm in Brazil, it may be 6 inches, but if I'm in Japan, it may be almost 3 feet. Which, sorry, we're one of the last countries that doesn't use metric, so I apologize for that. But the eye contact, the strength of the grip, or all of those things have a tremendous impact subconsciously on the person that you're working with, because they have the right to determine how far, or do you smile, or is business serious and you don't even smile. Those issues are worth considering. Particularly, I'm in the Philadelphia area, and this year we have FIFA coming, and we have the 250th anniversary. So we have 1 million people coming to visit, and you want to have that cultural sensitivity to make them feel comfortable when they meet you. But if you're the supplicant, you do more research, hopefully, and that's sort of a flaw in our culture. We don't do enough of that.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, it's funny because I was making this mistake in the past, like the first time, maybe for the anecdote. So I come from France. I have more of a Latin background, let's say by the patterns. And I remember the first time I was part of this international setup, I just hugged the Irish, and they were like, they froze. Like this lady was just like, what is happening to me? Like my bubble is way too small now. And this is at this really moment, like I was still a student, it was a long time ago, that actually I started to understand, okay, we are very different and some behaviors cannot be done. I also, as French, we kiss on the cheek and so on. Sometimes also give wrong signals to some different cultures. So it was my, let's say, aha moment entering into this world. um, but on another note, we discuss a lot the concept of ma in your book. Like I read the first book of the series, Kiss Boy Shake Hands, more of the business side. And then you open my horizon to another of your book, where we were going more into the legal side. And there were one chapters that were talking about the concept of ma, that is, a redefinition for me of the silent. And maybe you can explain it better in your own words. So please, Terry.
Thank you for reading. I'm so grateful that you read books. Thank you. Yeah, that's the chapter from this one. This was published by the American Bar Association. And it was funny because I was asked by different firms and the American Bar Association to do a presentation about intercultural communication. And of course, we're taught in different cultures, and particularly in France, to be very engaging and have good rapport and repartee, and you should never just sit there and be boring, right? You have to have some capacity and intellect to keep a conversation going. And silence in the US, if you're in a sales position, is deadly. So they're trained to keep that conversation going, of course, and then they use your name way too much. They'll just keep saying your name over and over and over, which, I mean, even the British think that's infantile and inane. It turns them right off. But if you consider what happened in certain legal situations that I was exposed to, particularly individuals from Japan, this concept of ma is the silence between conversation. And it's a form of respect. And it's in their architecture. You look at the space in a building, in a traditional Japanese building, it's peaceful, it's tranquil, it's in ikebana, there are flower arrangements, there's positioning of the flower. So it's almost, they call it a numinous gate that spans space and time. And it's peaceful to the point that if you keep a conversation going too much, it will disturb the Japanese. because they think you're not really paying attention, because there's no way you could absorb all their conversation. And because also their language is structured differently than English, it's more like German in some ways. The concept that's important comes at the end of the sentence. Sometimes it's the verb. So if you are talking and you don't wait for the full translation, you'll never understand the real purpose of the sentence because you cut them off. And that's a real problem in interpreting different languages. You have to give the interpreter enough time to get the entire concept, because Ma has many aspects to it. And then you let it dissolve down into an essence, and you listen. You can even see it at the end of a bow. That's Ma, that momentary pause. So it's a deep, deep aspect of culture. And you could also see it in Finland because they're very laconic. They don't chat so much, right? So you let them have silence. Or if it's the same in Germany with, I say this poorly, and if you speak German, correct me, please. It's like Ruchsenheiten, and that's actually in your legal contract, where if you rent an apartment, you may not make noise at certain hours of the day, particularly on Sundays, because it's peaceful time. So that was long-winded. Sorry about that. I didn't take my mom, but that's the idea of understanding that people communicate differently and show respect for that.
It's so interesting for me. Like I could hear all this story all week long. So I'm just super happy that the listener can also get a bit of like what there is in your book. But I totally agree. I'm not fluent at all in German, but I have exactly this challenge because the verb is at the end. So you need to wait the end of the sentence for me to flip it back, because in my language the verb comes like almost at the beginning. So it's complete different structure. And yeah, so it's super interesting, this concept of ma. I was reflecting also when I'm with this, I think we had discussed this already, but when I'm with Latin's roots people, we don't realize, but we cut each other off. And this is totally not seen as rude, because it's part of our culture that if you breathe, this is a silence. This is our form of ma. It's like you left a chance for me to talk. And also we love engagement. So it's like we love to see that people are passionate and engaged, want to share their ideas. And when I read this chapter, it was really making sense of a lot of situation I had in my life where people actually love the silence, especially the part that I read where this guy, I think he was like making a long break at this legal, I don't know, meeting to actually show I'm actually learning what you're saying. I'm thinking in it. I will reflect. And when I'm ready, I will say back. And this was really taken as, wow, this person is so intelligent. It was a haha moment for me, because it's so different. I still struggle myself. I was saying it to someone else the other day, with culture that are more mild, because I don't sense the passion, and it's really hard for me to realize, are they engaged? Are they with me? I don't know if in your research you have a bit research this part.
Exactly, exactly, because you can see it if you're teaching or you're doing a presentation. Um, in Japan, or I was in China, I was in Hong Kong, I was in Thailand, and this is consistent, is that if you're doing the presentation, you're not supposed to crack jokes. It's serious. You start with gratitude, and there is not a lot of engagement. So interaction, they're not even taught to engage in school. So in the US, when a student comes here, it's 20% of your grade is class participation, right? And then you have students from China who come over, and they have been taught, particularly the women, to listen and not ask questions. Do not raise your hand, because if you're in Asia and you decide, oh, I have a question, I'm going to raise my hand, you may be the only person that semester who did that, because if it's a consensus-based society, what hubris you must have to say, stop the class, I have a question, I didn't understand. And everybody's going to look at you like, what is wrong with that person? So when they come to a class at University of Pennsylvania or wherever, and they're driven, you have to participate, it's part of your grade. It's so difficult because not only is it not their initial language, not their native language, but they've been trained to abide by the direction of the teacher. The professor is very important. So now you ask them, come up in front of the class, do a group presentation, or you talk, and they freeze. So you have to work with people and help them in orientation to understand, humility is a big virtue in your culture. You have to set that aside here because you need to sell yourself. You need to participate in class. And the only way that I could get people to do that when I was in Asia was to look around the room and see who was actually really looking at me. Because if they're gazing at you and they might have an interested expression, then you can welcome them to, do you have any viewpoints on this or so forth? But they're not going to raise their hand. So it's very different. Yeah.
I have the right life experience example for you then, because like a week ago, I was the moderator of like a workshop, sales workshop. So the sales guys, they're even if they are culturally different, they still have the sales genes. So they are still a bit more outspoken, right? And I could see that there is still differences between people that are a bit far away in their journey of cultural understanding and some that are at different level of maturity. Because when we created like a interactive, atmosphere. So at the beginning, you need to a bit force or take the voluntaries, and then the dynamic it's created. But afterwards, it's almost under control, like not a control, out of control, sorry, because we have like the French and like even the people that know each other that just bounce back at each other, and they are polite, but then I had my Danish guys. They were like, I could sense that they wanted to talk and they couldn't, and they were like somehow like, okay, someone will allow me. So I was always this person that have to, as you were saying, read the room, observe, and give the same amount of talk to people and rebalance. But I feel it's the real skills to also, when you are maybe this outspoken person, to during the time read the room and sometimes just say, okay, I will not say my comment, because, or you actually use your speaking time to say, what do you think, Team Denmark. And I think this is like like applied of your book, what I did.
I'm so glad you gave them airtime, that you welcomed them to participate, because that shows that you have respect for those individuals that may not fit in this environment as comfortably as the French, who are always going to be able to contribute an idea. And it's interesting about questioning, because I think, and you can correct me, but I have seen the French in a meeting. This was with a pharmaceutical company, and they were then working with people from Germany and England and so forth. And the presentation generated so many questions from the French to debate, but a lot of the comments seemed rhetorical. It didn't seem as though they expected anybody to actually respond to them. They were voicing their opinion. And that's different from if you are from the US and you make a comment to me, my instinct is to reply, is to engage with that and expand upon it. And they call it this terrible phrase, let's unpack that, which is so weird. But yeah, you get these little phrases. And the French are sort of surprised then, because they're like, well, this is what I said. And
Mm-hmm.
do you think that's correct, where it can be rhetorical, it's just that they need to have that viewpoint acknowledged?
It's really interesting what you're asking, because I don't think we're the only culture that is doing that. But when you were referring to the way that the education in Japan is, or, in Asia, I was reflecting actually how I've been educated, because now I have niece and nephew that are going through the normal school system. And it's actually like when you're very young, a big part of your grade, like actually 50% in some classes, are participation. So you have to develop this point of view. You have to always find something to say, and raise the hand and talk. And you also have a lot of courses that are like, for example, um, a poesy. You need to stand in front of the class and you need to have read a text and you need to give it emotion. You need to, or you do theater. And this is like normal class you have when you're very, very young. Then we, in certain country of Europe, they have debates. For us, you will need to be in a club, but this is actually, people usually say, is like what differentiates, like human beings, is having a point of view. Or at least this is something that is really, really mentioned when you are in the education of French. So it's like all the time we do like argumentation, this page and page where you have a questions and you need to give arguments. And this is we are very well trained to give our opinion, but not, for example, not ours, because we need to say pros and cons. But I think that naturally, now that you say it, I always have a point of view on whatever thing, and sometimes people take, now that I'm in the Nordics, it's a bit like hard for them to realize like she's maybe not the most experienced in the room on that topic, and she has a topic, she has a point of view. But it's because for me, I listen to all like the collection of people, and now I forge my own point of view, and now I can propose based on my experience and my understanding what is my view, and then maybe weight on the balance. So I totally agree, and I didn't even realize we're doing that.
I think it's very telling that you have a perspective on how you were trained in the educational system to develop these skills. And there is a presentation that I did recently that we talked about, why do the French value their history so much, for example, or philosophy, whereas we don't, we don't even study it correctly. And I was engaging with the World Affairs Council of Philadelphia. I do their some of their cultural orientation programming, leadership programming, and the one gentleman who works there is French, and I was talking about how if Ben is thinking about what is the priority, the present, the future, the past means a lot to him because you study the past. But I said, and they were like, well, we studied the past in the US. I said, well, let's put it this way. They have Le Bac, where they all take the test, and one of the sections is on philosophy, isn't it? So imagine you're in school in Philadelphia, and everybody in the entire country starts to take a test in high school to graduate, and it goes on for a day or two. And one of the tests is, okay, here's an essay. Compare Cicero to Socrates' view of death, or something like that, right? Now, write an essay for an hour about that. In our culture, they wouldn't even know who Cicero is. They don't study Socrates unless you're in private school or something. So there's this massive gap in concept of logic and persuasion and rhetoric and history between the US and other parts of the world. So maybe it's because we're so young of a country, or maybe it's because we had so many languages and we had to be extremely, blunt to communicate amongst all of us. There's lots of theories, but at least if you understand why people behave the way they do, then it's easier to be graceful and respectful because they have a different background than we do.
I love the way that you think. That is like, it makes me reflect all the time on like what happened in the past to think who I am now. And this is the same feeling I got when I went abroad and I realized I actually love to be an European. person because of XYZ. Because when you were saying that, I was thinking it's true that some culture, because in your second book that I read recently about the one that you just show, there is this dimension of like which country focus on the past, which country focus on the present and the future. It make me reflect because I realized when I was in Asia, I had that in common with a lot of Asian people because Chinese, for example, they have a strong history. It's like the Chinese Empire, and it's they relate about it a lot. And I love, for me, even if I'm not in a cultural, historical like background, when I'm going to visit a country, I always want to do something cultural or historical. I want to understand, the roots. And I sense that some people they are not interested by that, and I don't think it's a lack of culture or interest. It's just that it seems to be embodied now that I understand. It's just the way we grew up. It's like we need to learn about that. So when we're there, every person, interested or not, will do it. It's fun,
Yeah, I believe that you hit on something there because the Chinese have like 5,000 years of recorded history, and we don't in the US. We have barely 300 years. And the concept of what's most important to you, if you talk to some new graduates at a university here, and you say, what's really important to you? Are you embedded in the present or the future? Or how about your past, your family? How do you decide things? They're going to be all about the future because A, they have tremendous debt, student loan debt. They need to get a job. They have to, that's their equivalent to success at this point, to get a good paying job, to get out there and have a productive future where they can purchase a home and have a nice car and all of these things. So we're an acquisitional culture. We're very self-indulgent. Whereas you look at China, they're the most sacrificial culture on earth, that they will pool all their money and their resources for 7 generations from now to benefit. And if you talk to a Chinese billionaire, they all talk about 100-year goals. So their concept of time is different. And the values that they associate with that is so different from ours as well.
Super. And I wanted to maybe open another topic that I love to observe and talk with different culture is like, the nonverbal cues, the nonverbal communication. Because some people are, you talk about maybe cannot be super generalistic, but usually the native English speaker, they are more straightforward, direct, like, low context culture. And then some culture are very high context, and we are, for example, as French person, we are very high context. If someone tell me, hey, what's up, how are you doing, fine, depending on the tone, I'm like, whoa, 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 this fine is not fine, we're discussing it right now. And some culture, it's whatever, we are passing on, they just focus on the word and not everything that is around. And sometimes I know that in the past I could get frustrated by people not understanding me. And then I understood that, especially in the corporate world, you need to be as transparent as possible. Because sometimes I had the feeling I communicated already this many, many times, but maybe not transparently enough that people of low context could get me because I was putting the form.
Exactly. If you are from a high context culture versus a low context culture, you expect nuances in the conversation. You expect, even if I'm sitting here or somebody from Sweden or Germany or Denmark or the US, we're talking as honestly as we possibly can. And actually, it's funny because the Dutch are the furthest on the spectrum for honesty is the best policy. Okay, I'm going to tell the absolute truth. And it can feel really hurtful in terms of somebody, maybe even from the US, because they'll, like, this was a situation where we were talking about how to give a good evaluation for your employee, right? And if you are from Denmark or the Netherlands, you're going to tell them, okay, you did this presentation. Terri, it was so bad. You ran over time. You were just, on this topic over here, over there, so diverse, and you didn't go in a linear manner, and nobody knew what you were talking about. You got to get better. Go A to B to C and then get done. And I would feel badly about that, but I'd listen. But that would be crushing for somebody maybe from the south of the USA who's, such a sweetheart, and they're always real, sensitive to somebody, because we do this sandwich thing here where you wrap bad news in 5.2 good pieces of information. It's an actual statistic that we will never say to you, you did a pretty bad job on that. We'll say, I really loved what you did there. And then you get to the bad news, and then again, you go to good news, and this juxtaposition, which you just said you do too, it's lost on a culture that's very direct. So like when Ben from the World Affairs Council is getting information from people in the US, he thinks everything's terrific. He doesn't hear, Ben, there was one thing in this long discussion that you didn't do exactly correct. He doesn't know. He's just thinking, oh, they love me, But it's important to listen for the nuances in the other kinds of cultures, right?
This is why I want also that maybe you can explain to us why logic and communication is a bit different across culture. Because, for example, for me, I know that I have I have I don't really love the sandwich, because I feel that usually a lot of the people use whatever they think they are so focused on the middle part that they just don't really care about the positive side. They just say, you have good hair, I wanted to tell you that, nice dress, like things that are so irrelevant. You see what I mean? So sometimes for people like me, it feels then it ruins the thing, because you think, if it was not authentic, or if it was not to actually help me improve, what's the point? And I also reflected a lot, because I have a challenge to unlearn as a French person. We use a lot the da da da, but as a sentence construction. And I'm hearing that in global context, some people take the but very negatively. For us, we always learn it as a conjunctions. Is if I say something positive and then something negative, or the way around, we use but. And we can even start the sentence with but it's not supposed to be, you know, um, I don't know how to mention it, but like it's not supposed to hurt you. It's just I'm adding something that is not exactly similar, and I'm adding a risk. It's something I'm trying to remove, because I also realize that when coming to the feedback, I'm almost not really listening to the positive parts. A lot of the French people wait the but to be like, okay, you're trying to like pet me, get me ready. Now we are coming to like the real dinner, like let me know what I need to work on. And I think it's the way we have been educated. It's like we want to improve, and usually what you do great is expected. It's basically normal. So we want to tell you what you need to improve. So it's something I'm actually thinking a lot about, how to remove my but, and also how to change a bit this mindset of also listening to the good part, because it's very hard for me to receive compliment. Like I'm trying to do the thank you, but it doesn't feel right. I don't know if you have studied this part.
That's interesting because people do not like compliments in certain cultures. Germany does come to mind, and they don't like the juxtaposition of good news, bad news either. They really that's just, and they don't like surprises. So don't start the sentence one way and finish another. Be on the same path, and but to not expect a compliment, that also goes to the concept of excuse me, humility. So if you come to China and you say, oh, there's a difference between complimenting somebody for a magnificent buffet or the way that the companies work together. You do it from a large orientation. You don't do it from a personal orientation. Like nobody would come up and say, oh, Terri, just your fabulous work that you did on that. Yeah, that's kind of unusual. It's like, we're going to book you now for this. And that I'll listen to all the nuances around that, which means we're going to book you because we trust you that you've done the research and we'll take care of you when you get here. And as a matter of fact, they want to meet me at the airport and I'm never alone. And that's difficult for me, you know. I want to go back to my room and have some peace and quiet. And they're like, no, dinner is in 15 minutes. You come out, we'll be out all night. And that's hard. So there's so many permutations. But really, the the way that people think they're helping you here is to give you a lot of accolades, give you all of these supportive statements, because that's how we're trained in school. If you go to school and you're a little kid here and you do pretty good work on an essay, you get a star. You get, yay, good for you on your paper, or excellent explanation and lots of exclamation points. You go to France and you give your little paper in and it comes back and it's red, right? With, you could do better. And that needs to be explained more, right? So it's trained in us, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, this is really something that because when you're European, we compare a lot to, like, let's say Asia or the US, and especially also education. And now I'm in Denmark, so it's also different. But I had time also to reflect on that, because exactly how you say, the way that we were trained was more also how we see future innovation. When we look at like entrepreneurship, if you have failed, that's not a good news for us in France. But in the US, if you have failed, you have better chances to succeed. It's like people will invest more on someone that have failed because they think this person is resilient enough to continue and this person has skin in the game. For us, it's like, these people have failed. Do you need something more? Like, these people didn't succeed. And sometimes it's also helping us to understand, like, the risk takings and all of these things. So it's notion also that I'm trying to unlearn also the way that you build your confidence, because kids in the, for example, I'm taking again the US because I don't know much for Asia, but they always tell them, and sometimes we joke about that in Europe, that you're amazing. The person is maybe not amazing, but you always build the confidence, like, you're, go for it and so on. But then you make people that have like a super strong self-confidence compare that. For us, we need to build it, and some people have more self-confidence than others because maybe they are naturally gifted or they have talents, and then the environments help them, but some they're a bit on the edge and maybe they lose their confidence. So I don't know where I stand also with this educational topic, for maybe my future kids, where I will put them. But these are something that I'm talking, like, I'm thinking a lot, that this influence a lot the way that you build yourself. So it's really important. And then it helps me also to understand some colleagues, the way that the pattern created them.
Exactly. There's many aspects to education that don't come out until you really analyze, why do I communicate the way I do? And why do I manage people the way that I do? And you have to think, well, how did you play sports? Were you in choir? Were you in drama? What were your paths in your formative years? Just like, how close did you stand to somebody when you were 5 years old? Or if you read Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom, somebody who's never been alone, who slept in the same room with multiple other people until they're like 13, they're not going to feel the same way as somebody from the US who has separate bedrooms and big houses and gigantic cars. And when somebody from South Africa or India comes here, or Vietnam, we had a group just recently, they look at us because we want this space. I want this big house. I want all this stuff, but I don't interact with my family much. And I have a very small family, and they may live in California and I live in Philadelphia, and the people from Vietnam literally look at us and go, "Aren't you lonely? You don't have anybody in your house. You eat by yourself. You don't even, you sit at your desk and then expect me to do that when I come to eat my lunch alone." And the French hate this too, right? It's like, how can you sit there and eat a hamburger at your desk?
But look, we are already going, I think, in the second part, which we are looking more at this cultural pattern in the corporate space. So maybe I will invite us to go in the part 2. And for the listener, you can follow Terri on LinkedIn. I'll mention in the part 2 all of her books. And yeah, thank you so much, Terri. And we see each other in the part 2.